Thom, give us a little background on how you came to working on this film with Piet, and you know, what your experience was like working with him.
Sure. Yeah, well, first just say thanks to everyone there in attendance for making it out to watch it, and thanks to the organizers and Kyle for sharing the film. It's great to see that it can still have an audience. I mean, it's been a long road for it. But as far as how it came about, I don't know in terms of the programming there, but I'd done a film about the design studio, Diller Scofidio Renfro, the architecture studio. And they were the design architects for the Highline Park in New York. And the Highline is obviously Piet. Oudolf, as you know from the film, was the planting designer for the Highline. And so, having made the film with Diller Scofidio, that led to having a chance to meet and get to know Piet, and it sort of just went from there. I mean, it just felt like there was something really special about the experience of the Highline that had as much to do with this planted environment that was created on the Highline as it did with the fact that it was an old railroad and you were up above the city and all these other sort of magical elements to it. And it was also one of those things, I mean, I think we've talked about this, Kyle, where like I didn't really, like I'm not a gardener, I didn't come to this with any real knowledge of what he was doing beyond having been at like his garden in Chicago, the Lurie Garden, or obviously on the Highline. And so it was as much for me a chance to sort of try to learn something and try to learn what it is that was happening or what he was doing with plants that sort of gave this, created this sort of transformative experience. I mean, it gave, you know, really made you feel something different and experience something different. That seems to happen in all.
So, I'm gonna, if you can't understand, let me know, but what did you learn from spending all that time and all those years from Piet that you could apply to your own kind of living or your filmmaking?
I think you're asking, what did I learn? Is that sort of the gist of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I learned that it's knowing about plants is really difficult. It's a remarkably encyclopedic knowledge, not least of all, like you have to know all these plant names and things that are. So like in the very beginning of spending time with Piet, as I was trying to figure out, I mean, I guess one of the things that is just besides sort of admitting that I'm not a gardener, I wasn't a gardener before I started this project, that it also the way that I try to make these films, not with trying to do a lot of research in advance and trying to have a point that I'm trying to tell in advance. It's really about trying to share like what I learned with other people, so that instead of it being a film that was trying to explain how to plant like Piet, it was hopefully trying to share what it's like to learn about how Piet plants along the way, and hope that that's more of an experiential thing than an instructive thing. And so, you know, like in the very beginning when Piet would be talking about plants, like to me it just sounded like music, like all these different words and Latin names and just all spilling out of him. And I just loved the sound of it, and that was kind of exciting. I mean, now I know some plant names and stuff, but I wouldn't dare say that I would know how to create a garden like that. And but I think learning and respecting what a remarkable art form it really is, and that it's, you know, like to design with living materials. I mean, it's one thing to build a building. It's another thing to create a garden that will change, will change over time, and things will happen that you can't predict. I mean, it's all about trying to predict, but it's really, you just sort of give it a chance to do its own thing, and I think it's incredible.
So I'm going to ask another, but if anyone wants to ask a question, you can come up and type it in.
That's going to be the best. Come type it in. So Tom, if you can hear this, we're going to send some chat questions from the audience because everyone has some questions.
Okay, yeah.
Look at your chat.
Yeah, great.
My question is, shooting plants is quite tricky, and also like I think shooting architecture is much easier. And also what I notice is with landscape and plants is always the matter of shooting the layout or shooting the plan of the whole garden as one. So I just want to know like how did you decide? Because I noticed in the movie there was only one shot that took I think the Dorsey garden at the end from the top. And was it a deliberate choice of your own, like in your process, to kind of take all these very near shots of the plants and the plant groupings? So I was just want to talk about that. That's it. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, no, that works great to just speak into the microphone.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it was really fun to try to learn how to shoot plants versus buildings. I mean, things that were moving and there's a little bit of like over the course of the film, just because it was also shot chronologically for the most part, there was hopefully I felt like there was a lot of like not knowing how to do it at the beginning and then by the end feeling much more confident about how to do it. But I think the question about the being close up and then at the end having that sort of drone sequence, I mean, for me, I wanted it to feel like you were in the garden, so that's why it was as much as being on the ground as possible, but it was hard to resist at the very end, not having, as much as like I feel like drones are sometimes ubiquitous now.
Yeah.
I think it's really nice to see in that garden in particular because that was the one project we had seen from drawing to completion. Yeah. I just think it's amazing to get that aerial view and realize like it is the drawing, like they are the same thing. It's really, that was, for me even, was remarkable to see, and I just thought that was worth the payoff.
Okay, thanks.
Great, thanks. Next question?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, now Tom, we can hear you on the computer, so it's all working good.
Hello. Yeah, this is better, right? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Oh, perfect.
So I have a couple of questions.
It feels very intimate. I like it. It's very.
Yeah. So the first question is like, it's okay. It's just like, yeah. Okay. So the first thing is that I really like when I was like seeing the movie. I was watching the movie. I really wanted to see shots from the inside, to see like the whole ecosystem, because like, he has always been talking about, like how natural it is, and he wants like to make something wild, but it's not in the wild, that we cannot find in the wilderness,
Right.
So the thing is that I felt that the approach was kind of romanticized, to see like the whole beauty of the garden, but I didn't see the ecosystem in the garden, and this is something that's real, that this is a struggle, and this is something that I really want to see. I want to see the insects, I want to see the animals and all of that. And the second question is about the sequence. Why did you start with the spring and then summer and then the fall. To end with the fall. Why did we end with the fall? I think it's not. Yeah, I didn't feel that. Like he was always like Piet has always been talking about like the birth and the death and then the rebirth. So we stopped at the death, right? Like the fall, how things fall, right? So I really wanted to know about that. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so the first question, right, about the whole ecosystem. Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I hope there was a few shots of bees and pollinators and things, but I think also it was, like I've made films about, I come from making films about artists first, and then I sort of got into architecture, and so like for me this was still part of that kind of aesthetic subject matter, or my way into Piet's work was from the aesthetic point of view, and not from necessarily like a biological or a botanical or ecological even point of view, even though I feel like those are amazing parts of the story and things that I learned a lot about. But I think in terms of trying to, just visually create the experience again of being in the garden, that, I did the best I could, and I wanted there to be the sounds and everything short of the smells. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like really getting basically down at the soil level and showing those kinds of things, I mean, I think that would be really interesting and maybe something. I mean, one of the things I'll do with this project is create other iterations of it. Like do sort of gallery installations or even something a little bit bigger. We're talking about doing now, and so maybe there's a way then to like bring that layer in as well. I think that would probably be really interesting. I mean, Piet did tell a great story, and maybe it would have been nice to include, I think it was sort of after I'd finished shooting, but there was one year where the garden was pretty thin, and it was basically because the mice had eaten all the grass during the fall, like in the spring, so that by the fall there was not a lot of the grass. It was sort of missing from the whole composition, and it's just one of those years where like the mice just overrun the garden, and so that's kind of what you're talking about as well. Like you just don't know, like one year to the next, and then I think that same winter there was huge snowstorms and flooding, and then all the mice drowned, and so next year you start over and you don't have the mice problem. I mean, it is very much that kind of complete ecosystem. I think in terms of the sequencing, like for me, I wanted it to start in fall. One, because I think that was also when I started shooting, so there's a little bit of chronology, like just being true to when I started the project. But I like the idea that the normal peak of the season, is summer, what most people think of as sort of the peak season of a garden. You wouldn't get that until the end of the movie, later in the, and then coming back to fall, I think was meant as much as kind of like a coda of like returning. I mean, that was meant to complete the cycle, so you had some sets that you went through and it was starting again, but it was just starting again in fall instead of starting in spring, or when we might normally think of rebirth happening. So, I think it was just, in part just because that's when I started shooting, but in part because I sort of liked that it wasn't the conventional spring, summer, winter, like starting in spring necessarily, but.
And I want to say that was the original title of the film, was Fall, Fall, Winter, Spring, Summer, Fall. And I think it's an intriguing title because I think it makes you think differently about not just the trip. It makes you start thinking out of the box.
Yeah.
Let's go with the next question. You want to do it?
Hello, Tom. First of all, I would like to thank you for such an inspiring film. I'm much interested in plants, and I didn't know about Piet, and it's very inspiring that he uses native plants and grasses to make beautiful gardens. And I've always been an advocate of that because in our north coast here in Egypt, we have a huge number of compounds, and the first thing they do is bulldoze the environment and introduce all European plants that are expensive and very hard to maintain, and then they die if they then get watered, while native plants can live and thrive. And what Piet is doing is super interesting. I was just wondering if he tried to study any kind of ecological interactions that happen between these plants in terms of insects and mice, like you said, or the surrounding flora that comes with the plants that come from different places and are put together in one place. And the other question I also had, what does he think about trees? I haven't seen any trees in his or he sees trees as an opposite to the grasses because they will create shade and they don't keep the same shape over years, and that's it.
Yeah, No, I mean, I think, you know, he would be the first to say that trees are really important, and I think, like the garden for Hauser and Wirth, that he planted a bunch of trees that are kind of make a screen at the entrance to the garden, so you have to pass through them. These coffee trees, and certainly in his own garden, the trees there are these sort of what you know, ornamental trees like that are placed sort of strategically. So and like in private gardens, I mean, the stories are pretty outrageous about like when he's doing gardens for private clients who tend to be fairly extravagantly wealthy, and then you know the stories of like they bring in mature trees and hundreds of them, and it's crazy, you know. So I mean, I think I think the gardens tend to feature the internal experience where the trees are kind of the frame around them. So maybe that's why it feels like they're not necessarily part of the garden, but I think he would definitely say that they're a key piece of the garden, and he has no, you know, he loves trees just as, I mean, that whole trip to the Arboretum that was in the film was, you know, sort of testament to like the importance of trees for him. But then, sorry, the other question was
I wonder if he tried to study the ecological surroundings that came with the different plants he combined together.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that is, I mean, yes is the answer. I mean, I think there's two things around that. One is that he's very particular about, I mean, like one of the things I miss a lot of things about not being being able to travel to festivals these days when the film is screening. But one of the things that is always amazing when I've traveled with this film is like wherever it's gone, you know, I usually get the chance or someone there will take me to like a local garden or a couple of them or a botanic garden. And so especially when the film's been screening in places that are completely different ecosystems or climates or whatever, it's been really great to sort of be able to see gardens in very different and varied regions of the world. And so, you know, like when I think about the chance to visit Egypt, it really, it's a loss on a number of levels. But one of the things that I would think is like, oh, I would have no idea, you know, like what gardens in Egypt would necessarily be like that, other than from photos and stuff. And for Piet, he's pretty particular about he won't take commissions. You know, I mean, he's done a garden in California, and now he's got a big garden going in Spain, and actually the islands, in Menorca is where it is. So he's worked in sort of the fringes of like the European or American climates and ecosystems, but he, you know, like someone from Brazil I know really wanted him to do a project down there, and he just said, you know, I don't know the plants well enough to be able to feel like I could do what, and it wouldn't make any sense to bring a bunch of European or North American plants down there. And so, you know, like I think there is a lot about respecting that plants have their place, and even if he's not a purist about native plants, you know, you can only work with plants from that immediate region, but certainly the idea of working with plants that are going to thrive in an ecosystem and not, as you're pointing out, in, you know, bringing European plants to Egypt would be a successful operation necessarily. So I think there's a lot about knowing that and paying attention to it and being respectful of it, you know, not just saying like, oh, I'll take the job no matter where it is because someone's offering them money or whatever, you know, it's I think there's a real understanding of what can and work and cannot work, and where you belong and don't belong, maybe even as a human being, you know, necessarily.
Yeah, I think Pete really is clear about that where he wants to be and not. Okay, we have another question from.
Hi, hello.
Hi.
First, beautiful movie, visual poem, beautiful.
Thanks.
Okay, now my question is about the whole premise of the movie and how you depicted the death and rebirth and life. Was that your own idea about how the movie should go, or his idea. I want to ask about your own input, the dynamic between you two, his input. What was the aim for the movie? At the end, what was your vision for it? That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think really the intention was to just do as best I could in sort of recreating for an audience in a theater what it's like to be in his gardens. And then in that or along the way, try to reveal or share what it is I learned about where those ideas come from and why what he's doing gives the impact that it does, or what the ideas are behind it. But I think that the way he talks about a garden mirroring our own life cycle, that's him speaking, and I'm just trying to sort of embellish that, or make that as, I think it's a very poetic thought, and I was just trying to make it as artful as possible in the film. But that's very much like Piet's own way of seeing things, and obviously in the making of the film, like I was affected by that, or I was moved by that enough to want to try and share it, and certainly I think like he and I connected really well. I mean, one of the things like the way I make movies, or been able to make movies, or because I can't make them any other way maybe, is that it's just me and the camera. Like it's really, I almost never have more than myself, sometimes with a sound person, but otherwise it's just me. So it would often just be me and Piet in the garden walking around and talking, and so which I think is nice. I mean, I think hopefully that helps create a sense for the audience that it's a very intimate conversation, and not a kind of interview or something, or he's not performing for a crowd, or that kind of thing. So that that's and I think it makes for it's not every subject loves that really intimate or wants that, or I don't know. But Piet and I, we sort of connected well enough for the film to work on that level, I think.
I think it showed really, it was very obvious that you have like an intimate connection, because the movie is very intimate and speaks very well about the concept of birth and rebirth and that. That's it. Okay, thank you very much.
Good question. Good question.
Yeah.
Hi, it's my turn. Hi, Tom. I'm Laura Lovelace. I'm at the American Embassy here, and we'd love to bring you from snowy Brooklyn to Cairo if things clear up with COVID.
I'm happy, especially today.
We'd love to have you. I had a question, and actually sort of related to the gentleman's earlier question about essentially climate, and I have a question about climate change. Egypt is going to be hosting, COP27 here, and it's something that Egypt is pretty seized with, but also, I guess, worldwide. Is that something that you discussed with Piet, or is that something that you were thinking about in terms of the durability and sustainability of some of this art form? What happens when you have severe climate? Thanks.
Yeah, sure. No, I think, I mean, for me, it was an important feature of it, and being able to bring it, touch on it, or have it be part of the narrative. I mean, I do think it's interesting, like, and I'm working on another film right now with some architects, and it's kind of the same thing, where there's a little bit of, they're obsessive, creative people. They're driven by this kind of overwhelming desire to create, and that supersedes everything. And so, like, there's that scene in the film where, it's sort of like Piet has a little bit of ambivalence, and I wouldn't say it's ambivalence about the ecology or sustainability or the environment or any of these issues, but that he's like, I'm just trying to make something beautiful, really, and that does have lots of elements that address and speak to and relate to environmental issues, but that's not primary motivation for him. And what I like is that that even if that's not his primary motivation, I think the gardens can create opportunities for awareness and conversation. And I mean, one of the things I love about the film is that I've been to a number of screenings, you know, in places where you wouldn't think it's necessarily on one side of the debate or the other, but I think there's something about gardening in particular that is like as bipartisan as it gets, you know, like people on all ends of the political spectrum garden and love gardening and are obsessed about it. And I think that's a nice way to get at some of these topics that isn't as divisive as the way some of the conversations or debates go. And so for me, it's actually a really nice way to address some of those topics, even if it's not very dogmatic in the film or very preachy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, nice to meet you. Thank you for your interview also. During the presentation of the movie, it was very impressive the way the Piet was talking about the emotion. I mean, he's telling us this garden as experience. And of course, the movie tried to give us, through the sound, to the music, through the particular image and excellent photography, this experience. I want to ask you, as a filmmaker, how was for you this experience in the garden? I mean, in the movie coming out, the narrative by the landscape designer, or is a mix through also your experience? Because there are also your eyes in this garden. Just to understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I have another one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hopefully, it's. Yeah. I mean, I think inevitably, you know, right? Like every film has the filmmaker's hands all over it, or you know, like it can't help but be filtered through that. And so, you know, anybody else who would have could have made a film about Piet, and it would be a totally different thing, even if we felt the same way or enjoyed his works the same way. But I think the emotional thing is really important. I mean, that to me was what, I feel like that to me is what is sort of magic about what Piet does, and maybe what makes it hard for other people to, I mean, he always talks about like he's fine with publishing his drawings and his designs because he really feels like at the end of the day, like people can learn from them, but they can't really copy what he does. And I think that, like, besides that self-confidence, there's like the element that makes it hard to really do what he does, or why he stands apart, is because I think he brings this emotional quotient to it that is like, that's something that artists, really good art, can do. I mean, it can make you feel something just through a visual representation, you know, and I think that's a special, unique talent that is part of what art is, and that's sort of where he's at, I think, versus maybe other very talented garden designers.
Hey Tom, we're about running out of time. We're gonna have one more short question.
Sure.
And then it's gonna come from Nouvel. You can ask the last question, and then we'll wrap up quickly after that.
Yes, and the second question is related with this first one. And I think so it's more an artistic and aesthetic experience, the work of it, but it's very soft, the message behind, because, you know, we ask you many questions about what is the ecology, what is the... But I think so, through this aesthetic experience, it moves something to reconnect the humans with the environment. And I think so, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know if this interpretation is right, but I remember when I was working in the High Line, and this was the message, and this urban jungle give a message to reconnect with the sense of the nature. I don't know if this was the same point, or maybe it's a wrong interpretation of the documentary, of the movie.
No, I mean, I think, well, for one thing, I think, once you make the film and get it out, then people are free to make whatever connections they want. And there's no sort of wrong interpretation, I don't think. But I do agree, and I think that's like one of the most important things, and it isn't specific to like it doesn't have to be a Piet Oudolf garden, but I think any of these efforts to bring nature and bring the experience of nature and wildness, or whatever you want to call it, into urban environments is critical to, you know, the health of the planet, the saving of the planet. I mean, you can think of it in the most extreme terms you want, because I think, you know, the way that we as a people, as a species or whatever, have been moving to urban environments, that needs to come with some appreciation and an awareness of what the rest of the planet is and what it needs to survive. And I think it's critical. And I think things like effective public parks and green spaces can play a key role in that. I think they're essential.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Thom, we have to go, but thanks so much. Let's give Thom a round of applause. He's got other movies coming up, and I'll let you guys know about them, but some architecture films. So thanks so much, Thom, and we'll see you back in Brooklyn. Bye.
Sorry, I have no idea where it is. I can, yeah. Step into.
Everyone, we just said thanks a lot for taking time to join us.
Great, no, it's really fun. And it's a nice way to spend a snowy, shut-in day. I mean, I'm locked in for a number of reasons here, but yeah, it's great.
Okay, talk to you soon. Bye, Thom.
All right, thanks, Kyle. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.